Okay, let's talk about a character so many of us know, maybe a little too well, the good child. You know the one, always responsible, always easy, never a problem. But what if that perfect image is actually hiding a much more complicated and, honestly, a much more painful reality? Today, we're going to pull back that curtain and explore the real, hidden cost of being the good child. They were the perfect child, never any trouble. Have you ever heard that? Maybe you said it about your own kid, or maybe it was said about you. It's meant to be the highest praise, right? A sign of a job well done. But today, we're going to challenge that whole idea because that praise, it comes with a cost. So to really get this, we've got to shift how we think about it. This isn't just a personality trait. So often, it's actually a performance. It's a kind of magic trick, really. The whole good child persona is this carefully built illusion, a disappearing act where the child's real needs, their messy feelings, they just vanish. Let's just reframe this for a second. What if being quiet and compliant and low maintenance, what if that wasn't the sign of a happy-go-lucky kid at all? What if it was a high-stakes survival strategy, a skill they had to learn in an environment where being truly seen, truly heard, felt way too dangerous or maybe even impossible?
You know, every great magic trick has a secret. In magic, they call it the turn. It's that moment where something ordinary is made to do something extraordinary. Well, for the good child, the turn happens when they learn, out of pure necessity, to make their own needs disappear for the good of everyone else.
And there's a word for this, a psychological term, parentification. It's this subtle but really profound role reversal, where the child literally becomes the emotional thermostat for the whole family. Think about that for a second. They're constantly reading the room, managing adult emotions, and twisting their own behavior just to keep the peace, all before they even have the words for their own feelings.
And this, right here, just shows you the huge disconnect. On the outside, what do people see? A mature, independent, helpful kid. But behind that curtain, that same child is working serious overtime. They're managing grown-up emotions, suppressing their own needs, and sacrificing their authentic self, all to keep the family system afloat. That is an incredibly heavy burden for a kid to carry. And let's be super clear about this. This is not a personality trait. No child is just born easy. It's a learned response. And it's often a response to an environment of emotional neglect, where their attempts to get connection or help just weren't met time and time again. So they learned a tough lesson. Asking doesn't work.
And this behavior gets locked in place by a really powerful cycle. It starts simply. A need pops up, for comfort, attention, help. But experience has already taught the child not to expect a response. So what happens? They stop asking. And then here comes the twist. They get praised for it. They're called mature, independent, so easy. And all that praise just reinforces this devastating idea that their silence is a virtue.
So in our magic act, the final part is called the prestige. It's the big reveal, the shocking consequence of the trick. But for the good child, the prestige isn't a round of applause. It's the long-term cost of their disappearing act, a cost that becomes painfully obvious in adulthood. Which, of course, brings us to the most important question of all. What happens when the performance is over? When that child grows up? A whole childhood spent making yourself small for other people? Well, it has a pretty profound aftermath. And here's the frightening part. What started as a coping mechanism in childhood, it often hardens into a permanent identity. The act becomes the reality. They literally don't know how to stop disappearing, mainly because no one ever taught them how to show up for themselves in the first place.
And this is where we land. The adult aftermath. This is where the bill for that long-running childhood performance finally comes due. Take a look at this list. Does any of it sound familiar? Chronic people-pleasing because your value is always tied to how useful you were. High-functioning anxiety from a lifetime of scanning every room for emotional threats. Having a really hard time setting boundaries. A fuzzy sense of who you even are. And that deep nagging fear that at your core, you're just a burden to other people. It all tracks back to that early role you had to play.
Ultimately, this is the tragic imbalance, isn't it? You become an expert at sensing and meeting the needs of everyone around you, but when it comes to your own well-being, you're a total beginner. That muscle for self-care, it was never even allowed to develop.
And if you want to boil the whole thing down to one core idea, one core sacrifice, this is it. The child sacrifices their authenticity to ensure the family's stability. It's a huge trade-off, giving up who you actually are just to keep the peace.
So I want to leave you with this question. The next time you hear someone praising a child for being so easy or no trouble at all, maybe the next time you say it yourself, just pause for a second and ask, are we praising a good child or are we rewarding a disappearing one? It's definitely something to think about.
If you're still not following Sketmind, you probably won't see this again. If you're following, you're sharpening your psychology every day.